समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to ThePrint. So we've put together this panel here this morning to discuss the upcoming Modi-Trump visit as Prime Minister Modi has just touched down in Washington, D.C. So we're going to talk about what we can expect, what Trump's America is like right now, and what India can gain from this. So first things first, I'll start with introducing Seema Sirohi, foreign policy analyst and journalist who's currently based in D.C. So Seema, can you tell us what is the mood like in DC right now? What has it been like? How have things been for the last couple of weeks? Just talk us through what it's like to be in DC.
Hello, and thank you for having me. Washington, D.C. is like in the midst of a Trumpian hurricane, I would say. It's week 3. And so much has happened, both on the domestic as well as the foreign front, that people are just drowning in the torrent of news. This is a very particular PR tactic to flood the zone, and so that the people will not focus on any one executive order and will not be able to outrage against one executive order. So in terms of foreign policy stuff, he has today announced that he's talking to President Putin, and there is stuff going on as to how to end the Ukraine war. So a lot has been achieved. I think 3 hostages have been released, like kind of a goodwill measure. In terms of his own neighborhood, they have got Panama to agree that they will try to reduce Chinese influence at both ends of the Panama Canal. Illegal immigrants are being sent back. They've been sent back to India as well. So he's in a tearing hurry, I would say, to get things done. He has a small window before the midterm elections. So it's 2 years in which he wants to get a lot done and signal to the base, which is the MAGA base, that he's keeping his promises. So Prime Minister Modi landed today, and just today the White House announced that Trump will announce tomorrow reciprocal tariffs against countries. India is likely to be on that list. So it is going to create a little bit, even though it's an expected move, but to announce it just before the Prime Minister is going to meet him is like really in your face kind of tactic by Trump. Mm-hmm. He doesn't care about niceties. This time around, it's a very different Trump from the first time. I know that India managed the relationship really well the first time around. But this time, he's kind of more aggressive, more determined, more exacting, and even more transactional. So that is basically the scenario.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask Professor Rajagopalan actually about this, because you'd written a piece for us a couple of months ago about how Trump has now entered into a completely different world. He's entered Trump 2.0 in a completely different world. But in a way, both Trump and Modi are meeting today as leaders of very different countries than when they first met. So can you tell us a bit more about what to expect, how you see this relationship panning out now, and what is kinds of, because there's also been a historical suspicion that India sort of had towards the US, right? Do you see some of that returning, especially with these kinds of, like Seema said, in-your-face measures?
Thank you for inviting me. Yes, I think it's a somewhat different world, a significantly different world, I would say, from what Trump left a couple of years back, partly because the world has gotten worse in many respects for the United States. It is a world in which Sino-Russian collaboration has been enhanced, a world in which Chinese power has continued to increase, even though, relatively speaking, U.S. power hasn't declined very much because its American economic growth has been quite good. But it is a world which is a lot more chaotic because partly as a result of the changed situation, US's inability to some extent to manage that power relationships with its adversaries, but also with its allies. I mean, I think Biden had 4 years in which he could have tried to have a different relationship with American allies, convince them to do more, which they haven't really done very much more. So it's a lot more chaotic world in that aspect. And of course, we have Gaza and we have a whole bunch of other problems. We have Ukraine and continual Chinese pushing on in the Indo-Pacific. So there is. So it's in many respects a lot more dangerous and difficult world that Trump is facing. But it is also a world which is potentially quite problematic for India because it is in India's interest to have a strong America, strong United States, because without a strong United States, it is going to be a lot more difficult for us to be able to deter China to maintain some level of stability in the Indo-Pacific, which are in our interest. So so Trump is coming back, and as Seema said, he and his administration are flooding the zone, but in some respects, a lot of this is PR, which is in some ways may be good and some ways may be bad. It's good in the sense that Trump is transactional, but his transactions change all the time, day to day. I mean, so tomorrow he may announce tariffs. The day after, he'll find some loopholes to let preferred countries out of the tariffs. Last time, for example, he came in, got out of NAFTA and then came up with a new deal, which is basically the same as NAFTA. So just change the name. So it is useful to, I think many countries have learned the lesson that it is useful to have Trump have some victories.
Yeah.
At least the PR. I mean, so I think
Yeah.
we have done that well too. So I think that's basically the challenge. I mean, finding ways to let him have his victories without necessarily changing anything on the ground.
I mean, this is a man who famously changes his mind and has
Yep.
has made complete foreign policy U-turns over between the first administration and the second. Swasti, I want to ask you actually to tell us a bit more about the Indo-US relationship, and do you think India sort of occupies a place higher up the ladder for America? Like, do you really think that Trump sees India for the opportunity that it presents in the geopolitical world today?
Oh, yes, so absolutely. First, thanks for having me, Vandana. And it's a pleasure to share the space with the two experts that I really admire and sort of follow very frequently. Now, with respect to whether India is important enough for Trump, I mean, for a person as transactionalist as Trump, I think he totally gets the point of how important the India-US relationship is for a variety of factors. And I think in that limited sense, of course, India is on priority. There is no doubt about it. If you look at how the bipartisan consensus has been in the US when it comes to its ties with India, and especially since the US pivoted towards the Indo-Pacific and renamed their PACOM the Indo-Pacific Command. Earlier it was called Pacific Command, and they started deploying more and more capabilities in the region, and all the other parallel developments that you saw in India-US trade ties, India-US economic ties, became steadier. I think there is little doubt on the fact that from Trump's perspective, yes, India is an important counterbalance when it comes to China's attempts at unilaterally changing the status quo in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think there is little doubt about that, Vandana. I think what we really need to be worried about here is a bit of nuance, which is that how willing India is to sort of now operate in a room which is smaller when it comes to operating its strategic autonomy. I think there has been a lot of hue and cry, especially during Biden administration, and all the communication that we had with the Biden administration over saying that, oh, they are critical of our human rights, they're critical of this and that. And when Donald Trump is going to come to the White House, everything is going to be hunky dory. And now that we actually have Donald Trump, we are seeing that his policies are having short-term impacts, of course, which are there for him to show to everybody, as Seema said, and also to his MAGA base, but also long-term implications. And out of those, I mean, there are certain things that I can talk about. First is that India will have to give concessions. We have seen that just days before Prime Minister Modi has embarked on this visit, the finance minister, and especially when she presented the budget, did really, go for kind of accommodating America's demands on reducing the tariffs. So that's already been done. It's actually, they've started doing it, and they are going to go on doing it. That's the first thing. So there is no way that India will not have to give into that. That's first. So reduction of tariffs will happen. The second thing is that India will also have to do other things to balance the trade deficit. And my hunch will be that India will have to buy more hydrocarbons, as it happened in the first Trump administration. The third thing is about the defense. I think even though there seems to be a lot of, I would say, confusion in the Indian strategic circles about whether you can trust America or not, but the fact of the matter is that today we are going to be dependent on the US for the supply of the GE 404 and the 414 engines. Not just that, even though it remains extremely unpopular, but I think there is a lot of development happening on the Strikers vehicles. And last I checked, I think the P-81 aircraft deal is now back on table. So we will have to look at an overall package where we are trying to accommodate Donald Trump better. Why? Because yes, America is India's best bet when it comes to sort of balancing China's rise in the Indo-Pacific. Because let's not forget, uh, China talks about a multipolar world but a unipolar Asia, whereas India believes in a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia where India is a pole. So rhetoric aside, I don't see any other way for this to go ahead, and the importance will continue, of course.
God, I actually want to come back to you on the Indo-Pacific, but before that, I want to ask Seema a bit more about whether there is this kind of room to maneuver within with Trump, right? He's already sort of, you mentioned this, he's already sort of flooded the zone. He's done so much in terms of foreign policy. There's even domestically, he's sort of taken a wrecking ball to whatever institutions or the way that we're used to institutions functioning in the US. So is there this kind of room? Do you see these kinds of recalibrations happening with India, whether within the Indo-Pacific or at large? Or is it just going to be something like Trump's agenda and we follow through with that?
No, that's why it's going to be a test of Indian diplomacy and how well Modi can state his case. He has to push back if Trump comes on too strong or demands too many things, pushes India too hard on any single issue. So that's why this visit is quite important, and I'm glad they decided to do it early, and because you can sort of convey your messages, do your signaling early on, and still have time to sort of achieve things. So let's see. America can't do everything by itself. It does need India to counter China in Asia. So that one thing is quite important. He may ask the Indian Navy to do more, or he may push for Quad to become more security oriented, because now Quad has gone kind of all over the place, vaccine, education, this, that, and the other. It doesn't have a clear, short, sort of agenda. So maybe there'll be some trimming of the very sprawling bilateral stuff that we are doing, which many times what happens, it happened during Obama administration also. There were more than 30 bilateral dialogues, most of which never achieved a thing. Many of them never met. They just announced, and it made both bureaucracies feel really great and important, but they never followed up. So maybe there'll be some of that, because if he really is serious about cutting down the federal bureaucracy, then there'll be fewer people, handling
Yeah.
the thing. Maybe the American State Department will face the India problem, having three people look after like 16 or 20 different things. Um, so I think there will be room to maneuver. Uh, and the External Affairs Minister has very successfully managed so far to make Quad the first sort of plurilateral meeting in
Yeah.
the second Trump administration, managed to get the first bilateral meeting with the Secretary of State. So he's done some of the homework already and planted all these ideas. Let's see, Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary could be an interesting person in terms of where he wants to take the Pentagon and how
Mm-hmm.
he looks at the bilateral relationship. Right now, it's just kind of early to say. Um, I think the most immediate problem will be trade and tariffs. So I believe the Indian delegation is coming with some sort of ideas of a mini trade deal, if that happens or if something is announced. But I would say, even if nothing is announced, it's okay. If there are no surprises from Trump, like, with Modi sitting next to him, he says something outrageous, that would create a political problem for the prime minister. So if that doesn't happen, there's no announcement, but the two sides meet each other. Modi gets to meet all the key cabinet members. They're all going to call on him early in the
Yeah.
morning tomorrow before he goes to the White House. I think it'd be good. I am semi optimistic, let's say.
Hmm. You mentioned that there might be a trade deal. If there is, what would that look like?
Oh, I don't know. I because the Indian side has kept it all very quiet, and you know how it is. MEA never likes to announce or leak anything before things are actually announced. We shall have to wait. But the one hint they gave us was that there'll be a joint statement. And you know how both sides love joint statements. So they'll produce one gigantic joint statement in which there'll be 35 items. And, we'll be working off of that for the next few days.
Yeah, yeah. Let's wait and see. We'll know soon enough. I wanted to actually ask Professor as well. Like Seema mentioned, we see all of these senior cabinet officials are calling on Prime Minister Modi. We saw him meet Tulsi Gabbard, recently confirmed as intelligence director. A lot of the people that Trump has populated his cabinet with are slightly more hawkish, have a very clear stance on the way that they see the world. There seems to be a clear agenda internally within America. Like domestic policy seems to be okay. We need to focus, be more inward looking. Outwardly, though, there's been a lot of mixed signals based on all of the people that Trump has kind of appointed. Marco Rubio, interesting Secretary of State. His first trip was to Latin America. But at the same time, this is a Trump who's talking about Greenland, talking about taking over Gaza, talking about all of this kind of talking about resources and drilling oil in a much more like serious way. What does that signal to the rest of the world? Is this especially with his cabinet picks, who've kind of had slightly interesting encounters with the rest of the world? What does this kind of Trump administration tell us about the way that he's seeing foreign policy? Are things up? Are resources up for grabs again? Are we sort of seeing that kind of gold rush?
Yeah, I think one part of it that is that we all mentioned is the fact that Trump itself is somewhat transactional, but also not very steady and constantly changing those transactions. But the other part, I think that is the most serious part underneath is what you pointed to, which is basically the factions within the White House. So you do have you do have the America First faction. You have an China First faction. China First meaning people who want to focus primarily on China. You have a smaller European pro-European faction. You have a fairly strong Middle East faction which wants to sort of focus on Iran and so on and so forth. So there are a bunch of different groups within the White House, within the U.S. foreign policy, national security sectors, and we aren't sure how they would mediate these different groups. And we most of this is fairly new in the sense that the people who were assigned to those posts are just only a few weeks back. It is not like these things go back to the campaign or that they had laid out a clear agenda during the campaign. So we're kind of trying to figure out, for example, the whole Gaza thing in the Middle East, Iran. Would Trump want to continue the involvement that previous administrations have had with the Middle East, because that is going to come at the cost of focus on China? Would it be America first, because that again would come at the cost of China? So there are we are not very clear about how these things are going to sort of pan out in the coming days. So it's I think we have to wait and see how which of these factions have greater weight, or whether they will constantly be tussling about the priorities for the administration, and which way would Trump move. Whether he would move consistently in one direction, or whether he would be sort of skipping between these different factions. But also, I think in terms of looking at India's own interest, and when Prime Minister Modi is there, I think the point is that we should expect that there would be all sorts of loud pronouncements, which obviously Trump likes, and which obviously the Indian government is not immune to either. So you can expect a lot of gung-ho sort of statements. The real question is about whether there will be some substance to it. As Seema mentioned earlier, a lot of things are announced, and not everything is actually, not everything actually gets through. So it's okay to let Trump say whatever he wants at some level, because he likes these victories. I mean, I'm sure he will say something or the other that will be outrageous and surprising and whatnot. But what matters really is the long term, whether we can keep things on an even keel going forward over the next several months and next couple of years.
So you expect the bonhomie to sort of continue, and you also expect India to give in a couple of concessions just to keep Trump happy, because that seems to be the
yeah, I mean, I think at least they should. I mean, in the sense that in the sense that they can announce things, they don't necessarily have to follow it up, because I don't think he has the attention span to sort of really follow up on so many of these things. So it's okay to sort of announce things and then backtrack later. I mean, it's not that difficult to do.
Yeah. Speaking of announcing things and then following through with it, Swasti, I want to bring our attention back to the Indo-Pacific and talk about two things: the Quad and IMEC. Where do things stand right now? And I know that these are two of the like we've talked about this on your shows, Swasti, but I know that these are the two areas where there can be the most amount of bilateral cooperation or multilateral cooperation. Tell us a bit more about these two projects and how India stands.
So the first thing that we perhaps need to understand here is that everybody would agree that we need to take Trump seriously, but not literally. Okay, so yes, he is an alpha deal maker. He's actually in love with how he sounds when he's actually giving these grand statements. So we have to give room for that. But coming back to what you asked me about the Quad and the IMEC, very quickly on the Quad, I've already mentioned that Quad is going to be important for the Trump administration. If you see, there are people in his team, people the likes of Elbridge Colby, who has been a very, very keen, so to say, supporter of America's focus on the on the Indo-Pacific. He's there. If you also see some of his key appointments, they are all very hawkish on China, etc. But yes, I do agree with the assessment that at the end of the day, one has to also assess how things evolve, because America can't be doing everything at the same time, and especially when Trump, on the one hand, is also keeping everybody destabilized. So one of the things that I see with the Trump administration, with Trump this time around, is that he's not only keeping his arch rivals and adversaries destabilized, but he's also keeping his allies destabilized, right? And the case in point here, of course, is what is happening in Europe and in the European theater. So we will have to see, whether America would have the bandwidth to actually, and the latitude to really focus on the Indo-Pacific the way it wants to. I understand the situation in Gaza is fairly complicated, so we will have to see how that pans out. But I do agree that, yes, as far as the initial markers are concerned, I do see that the administration is very bullish on Quad and the Indo-Pacific. So, and like I said, that Indo-Pacific and Quad might get more teeth under Trump, because he's been very vocal against the BRICS and countries that are supporting de-dollarization, and we will also have to sort of watch out what it means in real terms for India. But I do expect that the Quad will get perhaps more teeth than it had earlier. So that's fun. On IMEC, quickly, I think what IMEC, what the viewers also somewhere need to understand, that IMEC is not a Middle East project. It goes through the Middle East. It is a G7 backed initiative, and through a program called the PGII. And basically, this is to connect diverse geographies. There is a PGII-backed connectivity project, which is also there in other parts of the world. And IMEC is also one of them. Now, what makes IMEC so central is that IMEC is going to connect, to give an alternate route. I think we all know, we've seen the map so many times. The problem with IMEC is the Middle Eastern part, where the peace has not returned. And even if the peace were to return, like some stability were to return, one cannot be sure about how long is that going to stay, or how fragile or not is that going to be. The good thing about IMEC is that, because ultimately it is in everybody's interest to really connect these markets, I do see that from the Indian side, there has been a doubling down on those efforts. Like, for example, Prime Minister Modi was recently in Paris, and he's actually gone to the US from France. And you did see a opening of a new consulate in Marseille. And a lot of work that I've been doing is basically to try and build more strategic gateways into Europe, because end of the day, whenever IMEC is functional, at least the Middle Eastern part of IMEC is functional, one can always sort of connect those markets, because India's exports to Europe are basically routed through Rotterdam and Hamburg, and there is an oversaturation there. So it makes a lot of strategic and economic sense to look at alternative routes. Marseille in France, Trieste in Italy, and Thessaloniki in Greece. And I already see that for the last 6 months from the Indian side, there has been this, effort to try and put that into place. Now, whether this is going to make IMEC operational cannot really be argued like that, because end of the day, the stable situation in Middle East is instrumental in making IMEC operational the way it has been conceived of. But we can talk about IMEC being more operational if we kind of break it down into its different theaters. So I think that part of the work I do see. As far as what is going to happen in the Middle East, I think it's anybody's guess. We will all have to wait and watch.
I just wanted to say one thing about the China policy, of potential China policy. It's not clear which way it's going to go. We all know that the cabinet has 2-3 China hawks: Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, and the second layer also, Elbridge Colby. But Trump, the way he has been talking so far, it's not clear. His attempt to save TikTok just because he got, 14% of the young vote because of TikTok, and ignoring a law that the US Congress had passed, going against the Supreme Court, which had endorsed the law. So then saying all these things about Xi Jinping and him solving all of the world's problems together. So it's very interesting to me where this is going to go. We just don't know. At the same time, I see some method in this madness, meaning the attempt to reduce Chinese presence around the Panama Canal, then attempt to sort of take Greenland because China and Russia have made inroads in the Arctic. So perhaps he wants China out of the Western Hemisphere. as like a geostrategic thing. But he will make a trade deal, or he will make some sort of, money deal with Xi Jinping. But in terms of the Western Hemisphere, he clearly wants to reduce Chinese presence. So that's one thing. I mean, I'm most keenly sort of interested in trying to figure out.
What are your thoughts on this, Professor? Do you think he's trying to keep China out of the Western Hemisphere, or Western sphere of control?
I'm a little bit skeptical in the sense that I don't think he's much of a strategist. I mean, I don't think he thinks in those terms. Right? I mean, strategy requires thinking about the future and a plan for dealing with a particular problem and things of that kind. I think he has desires. I mean, he has wishes, and he will find some way of, framing that in a way that will be palatable to others who hear it. So, for example, the Panama thing and the Greenland thing, I don't think has anything to do with China or Russia or anything of that kind. I think for whatever reason this is kind of a bee in his bonnet, as it were, that he has this thing about this being a bad deal, the Panama Canal deal being a bad deal, and so he's found a reason for it, which is basically the fear of China. I don't think that is the driving force for him. He just wants, an issue. He has these somewhat odd desires, and Greenland, I mean, God knows what. I mean, people can find, there are a good number of people writing in various publications in foreign policy and foreign affairs and whatnot, suggesting all sorts of grand strategic reasons for why Greenland is important. And I'm not suggesting that's not important. It's just that I don't think those are the things that are driving Trump's desires. I mean, I think we're putting the cart before the horse if we look for strategy there. I mean, instead of just simply things that he shiny baubles that he likes. The other part about it is that I think Seema raised an important point about the whole China part, which is that what role is Musk going to play in all of this, because he has his own interests in China, and he's obviously got Trump's ear, and so there are, like I said, there are these factions, and Musk is kind of outside of those factions because it's basically his business interests that are involved, and so that's another problem that we have to sort of be concerned about. But the point is basically ultimately that we have to get through the next 4 years, and we just have to hope that things don't get much worse. I mean, I think, and so giving him some victories on tariffs or things of that kind, some grand declarations might be useful in keeping him, in at least satisfying him temporarily, at least, so that we don't lose a whole lot going forward. I think I think that is the primary task that we have. I mean, I don't think we should sort of be very strict in terms of the specificities of the deals that we strike with him at this point. I mean, I think we just have to give him some victories that he can tout, and then hope for the best.
Yeah, I think both Trump and Musk are essentially businessmen, right? And they've kind of created a space where you've allowed private capital to really come and re-enter. I think it's going to be quite fascinating to see how things pan out, especially with the dismantling of bodies like USAID. But actually, on Musk, Swasti, I wanted to ask you: do you see? Modi has just come from an AI summit, right? Do you see AI become and also this is coming off the backs of DeepSeek, which I think shocked the Western world. Do you see AI coming up as an area of collaboration, as something that's going to come up with India and the US?
Well, so very quickly, I mean, Prime Minister Modi going to France it was important for other things. AI was the least important of all those factors. India has no skin in the AI game right now. Please let's understand that and let's accept where we are. If we want to be a part of the emerging digital order, we definitely have to piggyback. Somebody, of course, who really controls and calls the shots there. There's no doubt about the fact that when you look at the AI game, there are three main players out there. Of course, the US with all its AI capabilities, and close there is then China with the DeepSeek, and of course, I've written a great deal about it. We've talked a great deal about it, and then there is European Union. But the basic difference between the first two and European Union is that while the first two are into a lot of innovation and less regulation, the EU is more of a regulatory body. So they come up with AI, and the EU comes up with the AI Act. And when India goes to France for the AI summit, please remember that France's AI strategy is also embedded widely into the EU AI Act. So it is important. I mean, it is significant. Everything which is a positive step is significant. But to argue, and please remember that the AI declaration was not signed by either UK or the
Or
US.
the US.
Yes. So
Even though the
that kind
vice
of shows,
president was
yeah,
there.
yeah. So that kind of shows that frankly, it is good, but will that really mean something unless there are investments coming into India? I'm not even sure what kind of investments are going to be there in Europe, because I think the declaration, or what I heard from Macron, was about 109 or 110 billion euro investment, and that investment actually builds on the promises made by Canada and the UAE. So what I'm saying is that it's for Europe to first put their act together in terms of how far they want to regulate, how far they want to deregulate to promote innovation and competitiveness, and then perhaps look at what can they do for India. So AI, in that sense, I mean, if we want to talk about Modi's visit to France, it's important for many other reasons, and AI probably is the least important of all right now. So that's on AI. And just I would like to just say that. As a concluding thought, that I think one has to really wait for what Trump is going to do, and rather than what he's saying, because he's been saying all sorts of things. If he really wants to sort of leave Europe to Europeans, we will have to see if the US military posture in Europe is going to get reduced significantly in any way, what happens to their bases, so I think those kind of things are going to really tell you where things are going, and we will have to wait and watch for it. From India's perspective, finally, I would say that yes, I think what I would like to be expedited is perhaps all the other engines, and how we are dependent for the modernization of our Tejas Mark 1 and Mark 1A programs, and maybe AMCA later, whenever that happens, for the GE 404 engines and 414 engines. So I would perhaps want that to be expedited, frankly.
Any concluding thoughts? I know we've talked a lot about what America or what the US wants from India. What should the US be? What should India be bargaining for with Trump, with this Trump administration? Seema, I can start with you.
I would say one thing that is very likely to come up is Bangladesh and the US policy towards Bangladesh under the Biden administration that irked India a great deal. So I'm sure Modi is going to raise that in the context of rise in Islamic fundamentalism and just general instability in the region, and to sort of apprise him of that, and hope for some sort of policy shift. Now, today it came out that S. Paul Kapoor is going to be the Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia. He's an academic, and he's quite familiar with India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So that would be one thing. The other will not be very clear, but I think it would be hinted at by the Indian side, maybe not in the meeting with Trump, but with other, cabinet officials, is about the indictment of both
Yes.
indictments. How are they going to proceed? They are in the legal system. So usually the Americans will argue that we cannot control that. That's its own, they take care of it themselves, and the Department of Justice is in charge, and politicians can't really interfere. But now that Trump has no faith in the system anyway. He thinks the justice system has been weaponized against him. So let's see how that pans out. If he has no faith, does it mean that the indictment against Adani is like a thing of the past, or it'll be go slow, or it'll be taken care of? The other day, there was a letter from 5 or 6 Congress members saying that it affects the relationship with India, this indictment, and something should be done about it. So it's interesting. That would be my.
And what about the other indictment for the murder for hire plot? That's a whole other thing that.
It's a whole other thing in which India has taken steps. They can legitimately argue that one person has been removed from service, and they're taking steps, and I'm sure they've been verbal sort of promises that it shall never not happen again. So.
There was also some recent, Bangladesh was recently in the news because a former State Department official was talking about US direct involvement in Bangladesh. So I know that using development agencies like USAID, so I know that and this kind of caused some concern within the MAGA group as well. And it led to sort of splitting between people who are invested in what's happening in South Asia and in Bangladesh. And the other side, which is talking about, dismantling aid. So I think it'll be quite interesting to see whether Prime Minister brings up Bangladesh. Professor, what do you think? What do you hope to see in an ideal world? What would India be asking of Trump?
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to ask without, of course, giving something in return. But obviously, because he has to be seen to be winning something. So, so yes, I think the technology aspects that Swasti mentioned about aero engines, GA404 or 414, and all of that might be useful. But I suspect that if you raise that, Trump is going to say buy the F-35s rather than just give the engine. So it's a little bit of a problematic thing to sort of raise, and that raises a whole host of other issues like what do we do with the S-400s, because the S-400s and the F-35s can't work together. I mean, there are a whole bunch of problems. I think so. I think it's those asked. You can ask, I suppose, but
whether you'll get
we should probably hope to maintain some of the things that we already have, and buy a few pieces of equipment. I mean, P8Is are obviously useful. We could buy a few more of them. I'm not such sure about strikers, but there are other things that we've generally found very specialized equipment that we can use, that the US has that nobody else has, such as the P8Is. So those are the kind of things that we can potentially look for, which both benefit us, but also might hope to sort of satisfy Trump in terms of deals. I mean, so there are potentially things that we could do that on that front. So technology by itself, I suspect that might be directly more difficult to ask for, but these are the kind of things, and even the other issues in terms of the Justice Department cases, even though Trump doesn't seem to believe in the separation of these sorts of things from the executive branch. Nevertheless, once the case is in the system, I'm not sure how it can't be removed from the. I don't know whether there is any process by which they can remove it. Whether maybe you can talk about a plea deal or something or the other. I'm not sure how exactly that can be done. But those are the kind of things that one could ask for. But I'm not sure how far some of those things will go. But like I said, it is important though to give Trump something that he can tout as a victory.
Swasti, any concluding thoughts?
Well, I have said everything, but on US aid, for sure, I would like to mention that from India's perspective, we have to see on what America's withdrawal, especially through the US aid void, which is created, has been used up by China. In Nepal, we've already seen the Chinese officials have signaled to the Nepalese government that Beijing is willing to step in to replace the US aid's void because they want to give development funding. Also, remember, Nepal has been one of the latest countries to sign up for the BRI.
Yeah.
Similarly, in the Cook Islands, which is quite strategically important in the island chain in the Indo-Pacific, where it's the same sentiment that withdrawal of US aid from the region will provide an opening for China. Back there, close to America, in Colombia, if you see, it received about 300 or 400 million dollars in US aid funding, and the government, the Chinese there, are interested in putting up money to help fill the void. So I think what it's kind of counter intuitive in that sense, because if Trump is serious about it's his China policy, then of course these things should figure in, and we should be able to create a more complete understanding of what really America is looking for. So I think we have to understand that while the purpose of creating a Department of Governmental Efficiency is to try and reduce the wasteful spending, and lots of things have been coming out on that, and that's a great thing actually to emulate. But on the other hand, one has to see what kind of implications would it have, because from India's perspective, the continental withdrawal of America from the continental domain in Afghanistan has not really helped India much, because all that vacuum has been used up by China. So we will have to keep a very realistic, watch on all of that. And with respect to other things, I think I've said everything already. So I just wish Prime Minister Modi all the best, and looking forward to 2 intense days of a lot of diplomatic activity.
Right. And on that note, we'll wrap up our discussion today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.